Does an understanding of how your vocal anatomy functions help you to improve how your singing voice functions? I was talking to some colleagues about this last week, and we agreed that it's important for voice teachers to understand how vocal anatomy functions. But how important is it for the singers themselves? And would the answer differ depending on how old they are, what style of music they like to sing, how much experience they have? If you're familiar with my work, you know that I can't discuss this without some bias. The premise of my teaching is that singing is an integrated collection of movements. I spent a lot of time explaining to my students what those movements are and teaching them how to do them better. I've given it my honest reflection, and I can confirm that an understanding of these movements was essential for my own success at learning how to sing. So the question that I've been gnawing on since this conversation is, do all singers really need to understand the anatomy and biomechanics of singing in order to learn how to do it better? The thing is, mankind has been learning and refining movements throughout the entire evolution of our species, and up until recently, having very little idea of what is actually going on. We instinctively figure out how to move towards and reach for the things that we want, and how to avoid or run away from the things that we don't want. Our desire to communicate with one another and to make sense of the world around us helped us to evolve speech and figure out how to make all the movements that would make us intelligible to one another without having any idea of what the moving parts are and how they all work. So I had to conclude that while understanding vocal anatomy and biomechanics can help at least some people learn singing technique, it likely is not necessary for everyone, or perhaps even for most of us. Hang on though, because here's the other thing. I didn't conclude that singers don't benefit from an understanding of anatomy and biomechanics. What I concluded is that they don't necessarily need it in order to learn singing technique. I continue to assert that an understanding of vocal anatomy and biomechanics is highly advantageous for conditioning our physical instruments. If you have a perfectly functioning instrument, it may be entirely unnecessary for you to understand any of this. It's just that few or none of us starts out with a perfectly functioning instrument. We need to condition our vocal anatomy as well as coordinate it. And conditioning your vocal anatomy is much, much easier to do when you really get how it works. Here's an example. Suppose you decide to take some voice lessons because you'd like to be able to sing higher than you currently can, or because you want to feel like you have just one unified voice, and currently you feel like you've got this low heavy voice and then this high light voice and then some cracking or clunking that's necessary to navigate between the two. I can teach you some exercises that will help with these things without explaining to you how or why they work, and if you practice these exercises, your coordination will improve. You will probably become capable of singing somewhat higher, and you will smooth out your registration, at least to some extent. But eventually, we're going to hit a wall, and you are going to stop improving in these areas unless you take steps to condition your vocal anatomy. Because the most significant change that you're going to need to make if you want to be able to sing higher is not a coordination change. It is a conditioning change. You need to condition your vocal anatomy so that it can access expanded range of motion. Your vocal pitch range is largely determined by the range of motion your laryngeal anatomy is capable of. If you want to be able to sing higher, but you keep feeling like you hit a ceiling when you try, what you're actually hitting is a range of motion limitation, and I can't really just give you an exercise for that. If it was range of motion for your hips that we were talking about, I could give you some stretches for your hip flexors and your hamstrings and so on. If there are tight structures that are limiting range of motion for your larynx and making it feel like you're hitting a ceiling when you go for the high notes, well, those structures also need to be stretched and released. But in comparison with your hamstrings and so on, these structures are so small and they can be really challenging to sense and observe. They include structures that tend to be tight and overactive, not because of singing, but because of their role in digestion, your laryngeal elevators, your tongue root, your jaw. So if you want to alleviate the characteristic tightness of these structures, you first have to become aware of what you're doing to create and reinforce this tightness, because you can't let go of something you don't know you're holding on to. That is why I take the time to teach all of my students about vocal anatomy and biomechanics, so they can sense where things are tight, learn how to release and stretch them, and then be able to either relax or engage them at will. You can improve range of motion for all of the components of your vocal anatomy, and in my opinion, that may be the most important thing you can do for your singing technique. Learning vocal anatomy really doesn't have to be that complicated. When I first tried, I did find it intimidating and overwhelming, but back then it was because there was just a lack of accessible resources and clear information. I wrote Complete Vocal Fitness with a view to simplifying this process, and these days I'm in good company. I have lots of colleagues who are out there creating books and videos and other resources to help you understand your anatomy better. But in the end, only you can condition your own vocal anatomy, because most of it has to be done from the inside out, assisted by good kinesthetic awareness and the ability to internally map all of those moving parts. Once you learn to do this, learning to sing becomes increasingly accessible and a lot less mysterious. So if you feel like you're hitting a ceiling when you go for those high notes, or you run out of breath on long phrases, or you feel like you have to fight through a lot of tension in your throat or in your mouth just in order to phonate, what you are probably dealing with are range of motion issues. You can address these issues by conditioning your vocal anatomy, informed by an understanding of how it all works and an awareness of where all the moving parts are. Lesson 2 of my Vocal Fundamentals online course provides a great introduction to all of this material, and I will be covering it all in a live class this coming Sunday, September 17th at 3 o'clock Eastern. Follow the link in the next panel for more information about the online course and the accompanying live class, and feel free to reach out if you'd like an invitation for this Sunday's class.